He is an inspiration, and I am honored to present to you Fong Tran.
Just gonna take a minute to set up here. Hi, good morning. How we doing? Good, awesome. It is a complete honor to be here. I'm from Sacramento, came all the way here Friday, enjoyed some of the SoCal weather. So yeah, it's just gonna be a complete honor to be here. Yeah, in thinking how I could possibly contribute in a full room full of professionals that have been doing this work for a really long time, I struggled a lot. But when I thought about the concept of agent of change and thinking about values of equity and social justice, I think it's always been at the center of how I do my work. Is there a way we can? Yes. Can y'all hear me this way? Do we switch it up? Yeah. Oh no. We're gonna figure this out. Okay. This way? Oh, okay, I just can't move. All right. Very empowering. Okay, we're doing better now? Okay, great. I just don't like to feel constrained. I got, yeah, all right. But yeah, we're gonna do this. So, can you resume? I think I've had a really non-traditional career. So I was in nonprofit for about 3 years after my college experience, working with youth, doing job development and higher ed recruitment, and eventually got to UC Davis as a program advisor at the Cross Cultural Center, doing multicultural programming. And then for me, doing my master's program, I thought about what it was to combine the experience of community organizing, but also being in a higher ed institution and working at the center of an institution that has so many students of color, first generation, low income folks, which is the community colleges. For me, that was the answer. And so I was lucky enough to be a director of student activities at the College of Alameda, but due to family kind of priorities, I needed to transition and move back to my hometown of Sacramento. So I just decided I'm gonna be a poet and do this writing thing full time and be really broke. So now I'm here and I'm somehow trying to relate this to you all about talking about principles of equity and allyship. And so it is for me centered to how I operate, how I make decisions. So just to give you context of who I am. Oh, okay. The on button. Okay, we're gonna do this tech thing. Okay. That's on. That's there. Oh, okay. All right, we're good. We're good. Okay, let's just give it up for the technology. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So, positionality. So, just context of who I am as I come into this space. So, my pronouns are he and his. I'm a Southeast Asian, Vietnamese American, very proud. I'm a resident of South Sacramento. Anybody Sacramento? Okay, all right. Yeah, I'm from a working class family, immigrant family that migrated from the context of the Vietnam War. I'm heterosexual, cisgendered male. I have my master's degree in community development, bachelor's in social welfare, education, and public policy. Right now, currently, because my job status is always moving, I'm a poet, I'm an educator, I'm freelance, aka professionally unemployed. But, I'm trying to make the most of it. So yeah, I wanted to kind of ground my presentation in some theory, because I think that's really important, just to have context and framework about what informs our work. And for me, these are really key frameworks that inform my research in my master's program, but just in general, my philosophy as it comes to how I navigate space with students, with other professionals, the critical pedagogy as I navigate classrooms, and just my humility. So first is student development, the idea that we are empowering students, young people that are bringing a lot of background and experience themselves, a wealth of knowledge. And our role is not to, fill them up with our preconceived notions on our knowledge. They're not empty canisters, but rather they're empowered bodies that we're trying to relinquish the power that's already within them, right? By giving them leadership opportunities, by inspiring them. Critical race theory understands that we have a very diverse population, community, and we have to see them for their nuances and the communities they come from, right? We have to be intersectional in our approach. So not just seeing students in their race identity, but also consider gender and sexuality, ability, socioeconomic status. And lastly, social justice, that we're pursuing not just equality, but the idea of equity. That we were trying to empower and give access to all, not just equally for all students, but rather everything that they need for them to feel completely empowered and have access. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right, so for me, that's what informs this presentation. All right. Okay, so when I was invited, I was specifically told, like, you need to hype up the crowd. And so I need to do that somehow for an hour. I don't know how that's going to happen. But let's just start with this. You having a good time? Clap once. Clap twice. Clap 3 times. All right. And so, it's really important. Is that not sincere? Okay, no, really. Like, keep the energy up. As a poet, the more energy you give, right, the better I do as a poet. And so, just like y'all know, call back. So like when the performance is happening, what do you do during the performance to encourage the poet? Okay, snaps. Can we just practice snapping? Everyone? Yeah, some people. I already get the, I don't know how to snap. I don't know how to do that. Got it. Anything else? Any other noises? Woo! Okay. Hey. I got the posse right here. Fan club. Anybody else? Okay, what's that again? Yeah, let's give it up. Yeah, okay. Anything else? Any other noises that are appropriate for the context of a poem? Or not appropriate? I don't know. Whatever. My favorite is always like you had a good bowl of fun, like that poem is delicious. Okay? So feel free just to react, be like open, be present during the poem. And just enjoy it. And so this one's supposed to be a funny poem. So what happens during a funny poem? You laugh. Otherwise it's really awkward, right? So just laugh anyways. It's not even that funny, just laugh, okay? So we're gonna go into it. All right, one more time, okay? You having a good time? Clap once, clap twice, clap 3 times. So I really hate being Vietnamese. I hate being Vietnamese because every Vietnamese dude in my neighborhood was trying to be that same cigarette-smelling, hair slicked back, white tee, baggy jean wearing, gangsta wannabe that had, the Asian stereotypical tattoo of like a dragon, clashing with the phoenix, or some sort of big-ass koi fish, right? Or like a Chinese character on his shoulder that stood for like strength or honor. Homie, that's not even our language. I hated being Vietnamese because every Vietnamese dude had the same car. Either it was the Honda Civic, Honda Accord, Honda Prelude, Honda Hatchback, Honda something. Maybe like an Acura Integra, but that's still made by Honda, whatever, I digress. The most important part is that your rice rocket was lowered on some 15-inch silver spotted plastic rims, and they hated how everyone can talk about cars but me. Hey bro, you got that S300 intake manifold turbo, and I'm like, yeah, you know. No, I don't know what that is. I hated being Vietnamese because every Vietnamese dude had the same haircuts, and they were all inspired by Dragon Ball Z. Either you had the Goku Super Saiyan super spiky hair, or the slick all the way back, glistening from a quarter pound of gel with the golden Gohan bangs in the front, or you had the trunk split down the middle dude, or you had the bowl cut hair, or you just like Krillin, and you were bald. But to be a true Vietnamese gangster, you had a Dragon Ball Z haircut. I had it being Vietnamese because my mom literally put fish sauce in everything. And I threw up at the thought that my friends will smell the penetrating odor of my culture. I try to whitewash my food with American mayonnaise and McDonald's ketchup. I hated being Vietnamese because every Vietnamese man in my life either smoked too much, drank too much, got shut up too much, gambled too much, abandoned or owned too much, like my brothers, like my uncles, like their friends, like my own father. I hated being Vietnamese because every Vietnamese man in my life beat on the Vietnamese women that I love in my life, like my big sister, like my brother's girlfriend, like my own mom. I hated being Vietnamese because everything that I was told to be successful by teachers, television, society, was everything Vietnamese was not. So being a little boy, denying being Vietnamese was everything that I was taught. I didn't speak Vietnamese, I didn't have Vietnamese friends. I hated being Vietnamese. I wrote off my identity like standardized test exams, not really understanding that everything about my history and my language is everything that I am. So I took a retest and saw that hating being Vietnamese was just hating myself. It's a self-hate, an internalized oppression. It's a language whispered by colonists, oppressors, told us to blanket our pride, never show our true strength in this generation. This generation will simply be the successors of imperialized slaves. Because in this time, the game has changed. They told us to be colorblind, no history, no ethnicity, just American. But we choose to redefine. Because I don't know about you, but I'm Southeast Asian. I am Southeast Asian, Vietnamese American, and I know I said I hated being Vietnamese, but at the time, I didn't know what it meant to be in a family of warriors and refugees. I didn't know our broken education systems were at war and my brothers were just casualties. They dropped out of school, learned the gang rob, because no one ever taught them in English or how to get a job. It took me a long time to learn this, but be proud of who you are and remember where you came from. Remember that we share the narrative of a struggle, that we are the descendants of generals, kings, dragons, and goddesses, and they say that we carry the history of our ancestors on our backs. So maybe that's why we bear dragon tattoos on our shoulders, so we can always remember who we are and stay on track. Maybe that's why we love fish sauce so much. Old, age fermented fish, or the spicy salad stings of jungle decorated papaya, or the beautiful concoctions of curry and coconut milk and gaboon. We leave legendary legacies off the simple utterance of our breath. Maybe that's why we drove Hondas. Those were the very engines that pushed fish boats across Southeast Asian seas into refugee camps. Maybe that's why we pretend to be thugs. Because our parents are the original gangsters, right? Them OGs. While we pretend to strap guns, they strap farm machetes and long knives through turfs called sun-beating rice plantations. Southeast Asian moms had the power to heal all, and the healing power was called Tiger Balm. Yeah, Vietnamese folks, we have a Yao San green oil. That stuff like cures everything, like headache, stomach ache, diarrhea, gingivitis, all of it, right? Southeast Asian parents, they were super saiyans. They were the supreme Kai. Waiting tables, donut shops, nail salons, they did anything for us to survive. They sent it past Super Saiyan 4 and 5. As you go on to your own Goku journey, in search of your own 7 Dragon Balls, remember that we will accomplish all that our families have sacrificed for us to do. As long as you remember never, ever hate who you are and embrace your legacy, we will finally be able to grant our families their one wish. Thank you. So for real now, if you having a good time, say word. You having a good time, say what's up. You having a good time, say hi. Yeah. All right, this is the 2018 version. If you having a good time, say oh good. Right. some people knew that reference. Most of y'all didn't. Okay, all right. Yeah, you know, I realized like that's for me one of the most hardest poems I ever had to write was just to realize like what my identity and that positionality I was talking to you about meant for me. And for me, that was such a long journey of thinking about my race as a negative. And I think for a lot of our communities, we do that to ourselves where we get fed so much negativity about our communities that we actually start believing it. We start believing into the stereotypes. And so we internalize that oppression, right? Internalize oppression. So yeah, I thought it'd be cool. Maybe we pair up into dyads or triads and just talk about it. And so the question is, what did the poem bring up for you? How did you maybe potentially relate? Yeah, let's just talk about it for a minute. Is that okay? Yeah, let's talk about it with the people around you. Go ahead, 1, 2, 3, go. About 3 times. Thank you so much for creating community, have a conversation. So let's just get a couple of hands. Anybody have thoughts about what they felt about the poem? Maybe how they potentially related? Yeah, anybody? Yeah.
Well, just like, I love the poem, first of all. We were talking about on the way down here.
Yeah.
That with us, I was talking about like our Hispanics not knowing who they are anymore. That basically, they are what society says they are. You know, they're gangsters, they're drug addicts, they're murderers, they're all this stuff. And that's what they're pretending to be. And I try so hard to instill culture back into them, even though people, like you say, try to rip it away from them and get us into their box. We're not supposed to sit in their box. We're supposed to be individuals. And I love it. You brought tears to my eyes just thinking that's the kind of kids I work with that are afraid to admit who they are.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's incredibly powerful, right? To understand that there's a whole different side to it, where we don't necessarily know about the history of our ancestors, right? The backgrounds of indigenous peoples, people of color, and where they come from. And when we're robbed of that opportunity, we don't understand the richness of that history, of that resilience, of that struggle, of how we've been privileged enough to be in these positions because of that struggle. And we honor it by really learning and diving into that history. So, yeah. Any other thoughts? Mm-hmm.
I was sharing that we're unfortunately all afraid to talk about race because people think it's racist. And I feel like when you said we're just trying to whitewash everything, and that's dangerous because then we're just we're erasing cultures that are rich and important. And what makes us American is we're all immigrants.
So let's give it up. Let's give it up. Yeah, I mean, that's the reason why we're here, right? Is to talk about the complicated, the nuance, to have those uncomfortable conversations that may be discomforting, but ultimately is necessary for us to do the work that we need to do, to talk about race, gender, sexuality, in a really nuanced way where we can actually address the root issues that we see in our communities, right? If we play this everyone's human, there's no such thing as color card, we're never gonna create equity. We're never gonna get access for all of our students. We can't play it comfortable. We have to talk about the real issues, right? Maybe one more hand?
Thank you so much for sharing your poem. It's amazing, it's beautiful, it's empowering. It was really refreshing for me. Just the whole cultural race theory. Been so submersed in my work in the last couple of years. I had been dealing with, resonating on those thoughts, but obviously it's part of me. I know I relate with your experience because I went through the same. It took me a long time to be able to just kind of feel comfortable with certain things about me and who I am and my culture. Being that a lot of us are aspiring, people of color aspiring to coming out of poverty and to be empowered through education, the more that we become aware of these things and that there are reasons why our dads might come home and drank themselves, like drown their fears or whatever struggles. But as education empowers us, it just begins to kind of just give you that feeling of being proud of who you really are. And so thank you so much for sharing. We loved it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I think the core issue that I try to articulate in this poem is the idea of internalized oppression, right? Which operates on an individual basis, but also be very much communal, right? We have communal oppression that has generated through generations. And so a person believes that stereotypes or misinformation that she hears is true about herself. She holds that information back to living life and holds her from a full potential. She treats people in other ways that are less than fully respectful. Other people from other cultural groups hurt, undermine, criticize, mistrust, fight, isolate themselves from one another. And this is often synonymous to like internalized racism or internalized sexism. And for me, that very much is a byproduct of what we see in our communities when we are in low-income communities, when we see cycles of violence, cycles of poverty, when there's presence of gang activity, dysfunction at the home, presence of alcohol and drugs, lack of access to healthy foods, the inability to afford health care, language barriers and affordable housing. These systems manifest each other and proliferate each other. And so I think in this work, often we talk about the problem and we know it very clearly. We could be stuck in knowing about the problem, but I think it's in the nuances of knowing what the solution is, right? That's where it gets complicated. And so, we could be stuck in talking about the problem, but it's important for us to really dive in to what our different solutions are, because it ranges. The solution may not be the one that you have in mind, but that's the work of collaboration and equity, is that we have to band together to figure out what our collaborative thoughts to what the solutions are for these nuanced problems for us to actually do something about it. And so I know for me, this process, and this is the activity that I do with a lot of my students, and I really encourage you all to maybe think about ways to incorporate stories. It was beautiful. Let's give it up for the student speakers earlier today. You all are the reason why we're here, why we do this work, and why we continue. And you all represent as community leaders as we move forward in doing this equity work, right? This is a life map that I did, and so basically it constructs my own life path and how I got here. And a lot of it started with my mother, that was a single mother, fled with 3 of my older siblings from Vietnam, landed in Stockton, California, where my mom met my dad, my biological dad. Didn't have a lot. I was under welfare and food stamps. Both my brothers dropped out of the 10th grade, were involved in gangs. My sister graduated high school but couldn't afford college. And so I feel that I was really privileged enough that my brothers made a lot of mistakes, so I didn't have to. And even though it wasn't necessarily the perfect upbringing, I was privileged enough to be able to really just be present in school. I had an incredibly strong mother that I adore and love. My dad left when I was in 3rd grade. And I think that was really a calling for me to step up in the house and just be my own man and be a role model to my baby sister. And I think that really caused me to engage in leadership. I was part of Key Club. Anybody at Key Club? Yeah. Okay. Cross country? Anybody cross country?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Runners out here? So I know for me that really changed everything. And so I wasn't necessarily the smartest. I definitely wasn't. It was like, I fortunately was gotten to Berkeley. It was only 3 people who got into Berkeley from my high school. It was the valedictorian, salutatorian, and then ranked 37 Fong Tran. I somehow got in. I think, and it wasn't until college that I go through an experience where I actually learned, took ethnic studies classes. I joined an organization called Southeast Asian Student Coalition, and I learned about the history of my people. And I think for us that are doing that work, meeting these students that are coming from these backgrounds of hardship, and finally giving them the opportunity to not only liberate them economically and give them careers, but liberate their minds and give them a history, give them a sense of identity, give them a sense of community. That's a part of our work, just as much as getting them on a guided path, right? We are holistic in our approach. And so, now I'm Batman. That's what it is. And yeah, I'm just like moving throughout life and figuring out what I'm doing. Any questions, thoughts, comments? Sounds good? All right, good. I had no good transition, so we're gonna. All right. So this piece is called "Dear Young Men of Color." So we're keeping it hype. Yeah. Hey. Okay. So y'all have a good time. Say, oh. Yeah. Oh, people are getting better at it. Okay. All right. Dear young man of color, I want to say that I'm sorry. I'm sorry because statistically speaking, you will become a statistic. That numbers about you and your kind will run off like names, numbers, and descriptions in newspaper obituaries. Latino males 10 to 24, 19 times more likely to be murdered than white counterparts. 2.1 million inmates in prison, 41.1% of them are African Americans, 29.6% of Southeast Asian males dropped out of high school. You will be America's most wanted because you will be America's most hated stereotype. Thug, thief, delinquent, murderer, criminal, hoodlum, ex-con, etc. You will be every policeman's profile descriptions. They will use everything about you against you. First it was the eugenics, and they said it was in your genes. Then they blamed the hip-hop culture, not the crack dope fiends, but the music, it was to liberate us. Then they take control of it. Now all it does is break our trust. Man, we used to believe in it. Then Miley Cyrus appropriated everything and started twerking on it. But you're probably wondering, what does this Asian guy know? Why is this model minority telling you about oppression? But trust me when I say there has been nothing model about my life, aside from the Section 8 housing that my family the Section 8 housing that my family was put in. Welfare checks and food stamps became my family's helicopter drop-on aid. And trust me when I say there's nothing more gangster than hustle loaves of bread in destitute Filipino refugee camps for 8 months. But you see, they try to piss it against each other. They force us to play this oppression Olympics, but this stuff is more like the Hunger Games. And people looking to assassinate you. That even though you bear the historical scars of slavery and messed up immigration policy, that you will be hunted down and they will be coming in packs. And even you'll hold your minimum wage rags just to hold back the bleeding, they will be coming like angry villagers, and you will be their needle and their haystack in the prison industrial complex as a testament of how they'll burn the whole house down just to get to you. I wish the school to prison pipeline was just a scary metaphor. But unfortunately, it is our reality, our Jim Crow, our unsanctioned deportation, our militarized Ferguson. But we will be resilient and we will overcome. That even though everything will be used against us, we are exactly what this world needs, because you see, they try to put us behind bars just so we wouldn't raise it. Let me make it clear that we started from the bottom, but we were given bootstraps, so we coming up on our own here. We will be the unexpected, the underdog, the unforeseen, the unruly. We will break molds, shake statistical status quos, deconstruct the powers that be. And even though we've had way too many innocent fallen soldiers, like Trayvon Martin, Fong Lee, Andy Lopez, Mike Brown, you will follow the bloodlines and legacies of Cesar Chavez, Malcolm X, Richard Aoki, Nelson Mandela. And just like them, you will be a champion. You will not let this world change you. You will change this world. Sincerely, brother from another mother. About the idea of race and the idea of what it is to know our identities. And I think when you get into that work, you truly see that our stories, our struggles are not of our communities, but rather the struggles of many other communities of color, many other communities that have been oppressed. And so we have to practice the idea of intersectionality, of collaboration, of seeing our struggle as a part of other communities, right? And so for me, a really big initiative that I'm really passionate about is Boys and Men of Color in Sacramento. And so I was one of the founding chairs of this alliance that gathered a lot of community-based organizations that work with men of color from, substance abuse, domestic violence counseling, and, job development and whatnot. And so we gathered, high school, community college youth, masculinely identified men into a conference where they learned about issues of incarceration, issues of school discipline, of lack of employment, and how men of color are often disproportionately impacted by these systems. We have Latino males and Black identified men that surpass the significant populations in our jails. And so we empower these young people to be a part and hear these systems and hear these policies, but also meet with legislators at Sacramento to talk about implementing policies that change these systems from jail reform, prison reform, school discipline reform. And I think for me this is key, is that the people that are going to liberate these movements are young people themselves. We have to educate and empower them with opportunities to do so. So, anybody want to read this quote real quick? Volunteers? Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Based on my experience, I've seen where unity amongst the races has yielded positive results. I don't see any other way for people to gain freedom, justice, and equality here except for being internationalists.
Yeah. So I know for me this really inspires me to understanding why collaboration is so necessary, but in the real practice of it, we all know it's so hard, right? When we're at those shared governance meetings, when we're collaborating, when we're meeting across departments, it's hard. It gets political, everyone has their own agendas, everyone's work style is different, there's personality conflicts. Collaboration, by the essence, is hard, but that's why it's so necessary. Equity did not come easy. And so for us to be able to let down our guard and be able to build and see the common goal in the movement and prioritizing that agenda before our own personal agenda is just so necessary. Anybody actually know Richard Aoki? Yeah. Anybody? Okay, so one hand. So Richard Aoki was actually one of a key member of the Black Panthers, even though he identified as Japanese American. He actually was the gentleman that equipped the Black Panthers with arms and weapons so they could defend their communities. And he grew up in Oakland, went to Laney College, Merritt College. And so for me, he is a key hero in what it is to be intersectional and to be an internationalist, to work with other communities, because his liberation was tied to the liberation of other communities like the Black communities. Does that make sense? Right? And we have to see our work the same way, right? Black lives matter not just for Black lives, but it matters for everybody, right? And so we have to renounce it as such and be okay with proclaiming it, because it's so necessary to be in solidarity with other movements and to talk about Me Too and to talk about undocumented rights, to talk about trans rights, right? And so for me, in my experience at UC Davis, I was a part of a coalition of student groups where they worked on intersectionality. And so anybody want to read this slide? Yeah.
Okay. Intersectionality is the study of overlapping or intersecting social identities and related systems of oppression, domination, or discrimination. The theory suggests that and seeks to examine how various biological, social, and cultural categories such as gender, race, class, ability, sexual orientation, religion, caste, age, and other axes of identity interact on multiple and often simultaneous levels.
Right. So I know for me this is so important, right? And so we have our nuanced programs like Emoja and Puente and the Undocu Resource Center and whatnot. And every institution does it differently, but essentially we have equity programs, but everyone has to speak that equity, right? It can't just be the Undocumented Center talking about undocumented rights. All of us have to have the ability to navigate those resources and those services and understand the community. That's what it is to be intersectional in our approach. So this experience was the student groups. There was actually a hate incident where a young lady was attacked and called racial slurs when being attacked at UC Davis. And so in solidarity, all these groups were in solidarity with the hashtag they had created, Black Under Attack at Davis. And so even though they very much identified as various other communities, they knew the importance of what it was to stand in solidarity, right? And to get that capacity to mobilize and to work in conjunction with each other. And we have to be just as resilient in our approach. And so working across departments and communities and understanding that we're all constantly learning, right? If we're not learning, then we're not doing our work. We have to always be cultivating that culture, that critical awareness to always grow. And so a quote that I really like is, "Our stories may be different, but our struggle is all the same," right? Poverty doesn't discriminate, it impacts all communities. This narrative isn't limited, right, to one community. What it is to be undocumented isn't just Latino, but it's also Filipino, Cambodian. Gentrification doesn't just impact African Americans, but it impacts Southeast Asians, all communities of color, right? These systems of oppression are nuanced and they impact all of us. Therefore, the only way for us to really liberate is to work together, right? Maya Angelou said it is imperative for white young men and women to study Black American history, but it's also imperative for Blacks and whites to study Asian American history. And so I think, for me, we all have to have that intersectional practice of how do we grow, how do we become better allies in our work. And so this quote was actually by me. I'm selling these posters after, so yeah, shameful promotion. Yeah, cool. And so I wanted to go in this idea of what it is to collaborate in such a way where you're really equity-minded and not self-minded. And I think a framework that I go to a lot is the idea of what it is to be a savior and what it is to be an ally. Now, who knows ally? Okay, good handful of people. Who knows saviors? Okay, all right. And so I'm going to define these two terms. And so for me, the idea of an ally is that they work on an empowerment model, right? That they focus on empowering communities and students, while the savior focuses on the embankment model, the idea that they are the hierarchical power, they have all the knowledge, and you're privileged enough to be entitled to this knowledge because you're empty vessels, right? Versus empowered beings already that bring diverse and incredible resources and histories, right? The ally centers the movement over themselves, while the savior centers themselves over the movement. Privileges them, and the ally listens first, speaks when necessary and when most critical, while the savior talks first and listens later. Do we have a better sense of ally and savior right now? Yeah, great. And the ally seeks critical feedback, understands that it's a natural process of authentic equity work, right? While the savior gets very defensive anytime you call them out, right? We have a better sense of savior? Yeah. So I know sometimes we see these folks in our work, right? And both are well-intentioned. Both mean well, both want to help communities, but we have to be good in our approach. Just because our intention is that, oh yeah, I want to help people, it makes me feel good, doesn't mean that ultimately you have a good impact. Does that make sense? We have to be good in our approach and not just have good intentions, but be good in our impact and the way we navigate space so we better and center the movement over ourselves, right? Allies are in a constant process of learning and deeply immerses themselves into the nuances and intersections of the community versus assumes that they know everything, they can speak on the behalf of this community or that community, they've been doing it for 30 years, right? We have to be allies in our approach and always be humble and have humility in how we navigate space so we can ultimately be good at what we do on the behalf of communities. Does that make sense? Yeah, all right, cool. Right, thank you. Right. I know for me, I know this is difficult to practice, right? We're not always perfect. We make mistakes. But when you have humility, you acknowledge those mistakes when they come up, and you take proactive action on doing something about it. And so oftentimes I think when we kind of acknowledge we have privilege or we're maybe dominant in a certain area, like if we're white identified, I know for me being a heterosexual cisgender male has a lot of male privilege, right? It's easier for us to feel guilty about it and just oh yeah, I just wish I could do more and whatnot. And you can. It's reactive to kind of just have guilt, but it's imperative to get over that guilt and ultimately be accountable for your privileges and what you bring into the space, right? We're all privileged in the sense that we have institutional power, being staff, K through 12, community college, or that we're white identified or masculine identified, or that we're able-bodied. We have to use our privileges to empower other communities that may not be so privileged, right? And so this is a poem about accountability. And so I want to just provide a trigger warning that it's about toxic masculinity and harmful ways of seeking validation. And so, more shameful promotion. It's out of my new book that I just finished. Hey. Okay? I literally just finished it a month before, or no, not even that, like 2 weeks before this conference. So I have it ready for you all. I'm really proud of this collection. But yeah, this piece is called Chasing Validation. Yeah, we have a good time. Clap once, clap twice, clap 3 times. There were 2 things that I was in high school. A social floater, and I ran cross country. Being a social floater meant I can hang with anybody. I can hang with the track runners, the ceramic geeks, the jocks, the break dancers, the Asians, the key club nerds, who are really the same people. And I ran cross country because really the only thing that I was good at. I ran cross country because a bunch of not enoughs in everything else. Sports was a checkbox for manhood, and so you had to pick one like a Street Fighter character. Everyone would ride you, but not Dalzine. But you couldn't always get what you wanted. Running was the only thing that I was good at. And 10 years later, I realized it was less about being good at running and more about being the only thing that I knew. At a very young age, I had learned to run from shame and rejection since I was born. Just keep running when you're an ESL kid with an attention span of a blink and you've seen too much fight ingrained into the brothers and uncles of your family. Flight becomes your life mantra from which you navigate the world. Just keep running. It's like as if men got an instruction manual on gender from a Sports Illustrated magazine. The lessons I learned in cross country are the same lessons I learned about being a man. Survival is about staying ahead of the pack. Separate yourself. Get ahead of every other guy and never look back. Masculinity says that everything is a race, so everyone is against you. Every man is your competition, so every woman is your finish line. Crossing the line becomes some sort of validation until you keep on chasing them like mile markers. No wonder you get thirsty. Falling over gray lines, suicide head dive face forward with arms flared back. Social moving from one troop to the next as if you never want to get caught. Social floaters get lost in the competition of it all. Counting Facebook shares, Instagram likes and tweets. You crave compliments so you can't stop fishing. Seeking approval from everyone is less about popularity and more about personal insecurity. Talk with someone long enough right before they get annoyed at you. Like the girl long enough right before they reject you. I'm sorry to all the women that I ever ran after and quickly ran away from. In sports and masculinity, we were told to never stop. That stopping equates to quitting, and nobody likes a quitter. We never learn from the lessons of a woman's resistance, so that when we're rejected, we're told to walk it off and just keep moving. I wish I knew how to comfort the delicate parts of myself. Tell him that not everything about you is made from war. I wish I had learned to quit sooner. Quit believing that my value was in the validation of women. Quit believing that I need to be every other man to feel more like one. Quit this aimless chase, this endless validation marathon of a race. Stop. Breathe. Understand the heart that allows me to run is the same one that allows me to love. For me, I think you have to be practitioners of what you spit. And so for me, being a good ally is being accountable, to acknowledge your own faults, and to, be proactive in doing something about it. And so for me, being a heterosexual cisgender male, I wanted to just talk about my own privileges. So privilege is when you think something is not a problem because it's not a problem to you personally, right? It's the idea that we navigate space not thinking and worrying about if whether they're going to be safe walking at night, right? Or the idea that we're not going to be shot if the police pull us over. Does that make sense? There's these things that we unconsciously don't have to think about it because by the nature of it, it is a privilege. And so because we don't have to think about it, we have to be accountable for it. We have to be intentional in our ways of like, how do we capitalize in such where we empower communities and not just take advantage of it for our own behalf. Does that make sense? Right? I thought about this when thinking of applying for jobs. When I was applying for jobs, like my gender, sexual identity never came up as like, oh yeah, I'm going to be discriminated based on my gender. But maybe that's not necessarily the same experience for women or LGBTIQ folks. Does that make sense? Right? And so we have to be conscious of the unconscious things that the world kind of puts for us. And so this actually was kind of a cool quote by a game designer that advocated for more rights for women and women of color in mainstream video games. And so I thought that was really cool that it's not just kind of in the siloed sector of education or in nonprofit work, but everyone should be practicing this equity, right? In whatever industry, technology, and gaming, and whatnot. So whoever you are, it's important for you to always do your homework. And so for me, being heterosexual, it was important for me to what it is to be in solidarity of women movements, Me Too, and it's not necessarily to tell other women how to be feminists, but rather how to talk to other men about what it is to understand healthy practices of masculinity, of being accountable. And so as much as my work around school and prison reform was about policy, it was also about like how do we be good people? How do we be good men? How do we be good sons? How do we be good brothers? How do we be good nephews? And even though that kind of operates on a gender binary, masculinity, just like femininity, is fluid, we have to have those conversations and allow our young people to identify how they want to be identified within their masculine identities. And so giving them nuance of like maybe, you're a poet, you enjoy dance, you're into ballet, but you're totally a whole person. And you're just as much as a masculine identified than the guy that wants to play football. You're a whole person. Be who you are, love yourself. That's the key message in what it is to kind of operate in healthy masculinity, right? Talking about DACA rights, talking about trans rights. We all have homework to do. There's no threshold that we made it. We are the perfect activist and social justice advocate, right? We're always learning. So I wanted to ask the question of how can we be stronger? How can you be a stronger ally, right? So let's just break up a little bit and just kind of just talk about this. How can we be better allies? All right, come on, let's stop once, twice, about 3 times. All right, we got good conversations going, it seems. So anybody want to share their thoughts on what it is to be a stronger ally? Just get a couple of hands, maybe 2 or 3. Yeah, in the back.
We were talking as a gender heterosexual female. I see my role as a servant, that I am serving communities and working with and honoring and respecting others. And I recently had an incident where I'm so glad we had the ally savior slide there because I had people really attacking me as savior without knowing anything about the work that I do. And it was, I didn't know, as soon as you start to defend yourself, you're reinforcing the savior thing. And so I felt like I was kind of in a catch-22 of how do you approach being somebody who coming in and being like, I'm here, and I want to help, and I want to understand, and I want to listen. I think we have a long way to go to be able to trust.
Right.
So if you have any feedback around ideas on how do we build that trust on both sides, so that we can have that conversation without one side or the other seeing us as one side or the other anymore.
Yeah.
We need to see us as all on the same side.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm working for and hoping you'll work closer to.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a great question. And, I think we're constantly always navigating that is how do we get the trust of our colleagues so that we're really coming to the table and feeling like we can work together. I know at college at Alameda, being a new director or a new professional, sometimes that's one of the issues is like, who are you coming into this space? And like, what do you bring to the table? Are you really about the community or really just about yourself professionally, right? And so I think for me, it's having good intentions, but also being delivering on what you say. So keeping your word, right? That professionality of follow-up. I know when I was at Alameda, there was a lot of tension around, oh yeah, only black folks, only black staff can program during February, because it's Black History Month. And there was a lot of tension on what it is, being the director of student activities at the time of like, oh, okay, all right, how do I navigate this in such a way where all communities feel like they can have ownership over activities on the campus. And so I think the key thing, and something that was listed on the list of what it is to be a good ally, is listen. And really, really show that intentionality that you're listening, that you're taking in that feedback. And so for me, before I even started thinking about it, was like setting up meetings with black staff and other communities of staff about February and how they want to navigate that. How do they want to navigate cultural programming for the rest of the year, for API History Month, for Black History, for Latino history. And so it was important for all communities of staff to feel ownership for their communities, but also work intersectionally. And so we had a really rich Black History Month, API History Month, because staff were working together on intersectional programming. So what it is for black women entrepreneurs, or black queer rights, or APIs and black solidarity with Black Lives Matter. And so we have to be willing to meet and not just shoot a passive-aggressive email, but really like just, try to have that uncomfortable conversation, but just show intentionality that you're trying to listen. You're not trying to impede your own thoughts. So I don't want to be the only one. Anybody want to add?
Yeah. So I think getting to your question about trust, trust becomes a fear of failure. And you don't want to fail. But that's going to come up. Because, as an administrator, when I first started out, I didn't want to make any mistakes. And colluding was part of it. And to go on with what the staff was saying at the time. But knowing what you were doing wrong will eat you up. And you have to overcome that. And that fear is a barrier that you self-impose sometimes. And you have to be able to get over that. And having the presence, the authentic presence in front of your peers to listen to what they have to say, gets you over that fear. You have to let them voice their opinion. And your opinion sometimes is not going to agree with them. But that doesn't mean you stop the conversation, because you're trying to understand where everybody's coming from. I don't say things right the first time coming out. But the feedback that I get, and I listen to them, and well, Steve, this is what I meant. This is what you said. All right, correct me. Now I'm learning from you. And that's the same thing I do with my parents. I try to understand my parents when I go out and talk to them, get their voice. Try to understand their voice. And then take it back to my administrators, who might not necessarily agree with what our parents want. But I carry that voice to the leaders of our community, saying these are the changes that they want. This is what their need is. And I have to listen to them and then come back and try to get them to understand what our need is as a community. This is a beautiful community. And today you're here representing that community to move it forward. That's what this Equity Summit's about. It's you moving this community forward. And that's what we need from every one of you. So when you leave here today, you share this with your mom, your dad, your madres, anybody. Because this is a great community in which we live in. And we're only going to make it better. Today is the day that it starts, right? You don't see a conference in other communities like you have today, where they're going to charge you $300 to attend. You're here for free. And that's because of the funding that we get. We have no lobbyists telling us how to spend our money. This money is spent because you voiced this and you said you needed it. So that's why we're here today.
Thank you for forking your money over to pay for me. Thanks. So, yeah, so I'm going to actually rush through some of the rest of the content. Oh, God. So, I was going to do this piece called Don't Be an Activist, but the kind of key message out of that poem is that we also need to take care of ourselves, right? And so Audre Lorde has this great quote called, caring for yourself is not a self-indulgence, rather it is self-preservation, and therefore it's an act of political warfare. I know for me, you need to understand that activism, equity, is hard. It's difficult to have these conversations, it's uncomfortable, but it is so necessary, because that's what it is, to shift systems, to shift paradigms, to shift culture, right? And know that that is a marathon. It is not a sprint. We are in this for the long haul. We are activism and equity in all parts of our lives, right? It is not just when we're at work, but we have to be about that equity in all parts of our lives. And therefore, we need to take care of ourselves in that pursuit, right? There's all types of, like, oh, you're a sellout if you're going to go to college, or, all types of kind of just naysaying. There's all the reasons why not to engage in this equity work. Even the world tells us to become cynical, right? But we have to persevere on. And the only way we persevere is we take care of ourselves. So whatever method of self-care, I know for me, I started therapy, meditation, and I think supporting each other and developing communities so we support one another, that we feel whole when we come to work, when we come and support our students, right? I really believe in the idea that student retention equates to staff retention and vice versa. When we are not actively retaining good people to do this work, then we can't do the same for our students, right? If we feel, like exile, funky, negative in our work presence, then the students will feel the same. We have to create a culture where staff, they feel like they belong at work. They enjoy what they do. Does that make sense? Yeah. Right? Yeah. So, yeah, and I know for me, that's not always the case sometimes in our communities, right? In our work. It gets political. Some people are very career-oriented and are, planning their transition versus planning an equity program, and it gets super political. So yeah, sometimes when we're, in meeting spaces, maybe it feels less of a, shared governance and more like a Game of Thrones, And it's important for us to acknowledge this is the culture that's happening, right? So we can do something about it. It shouldn't be this way. Community colleges, public schools are done in such a way where we try to empower all voices. Staff voices, administrative voices, faculty voices, and student voices. We are structured in a way where we empower democracy in its ideal, but sometimes that democracy doesn't play out because it becomes about political power moves and games and about seniority and titles, right? Instead of serving community. And so I know this is difficult. How do you even grasp that, right? It's so easy to become cynical when the culture around you proliferates this, everyone protect themselves kind of mentality. But we have to cultivate community, even in our work, right? Even the research says if staff doesn't feel satisfied and retained, if they don't feel like they're performing well, or they're not given feedback for their inadequate performance, in a very solutions-oriented manner, then they fall out, they drop out, they burn out, right? And so it's important for us to have a very solutions, community-oriented, strength-based perspective as we approach what it is to work with each other, right? We have to create a culture of feedback, that feedback and critique is by the nature of community, and that we're not going to take it personal and become defensive. Rather, we're going to facilitate so that we get more feedback, and it becomes our methodology of work, right? And so equity is not just, oh yeah, we're going to have more increased retention, and that's all that matters. But it's also a process, that the way we get there is just as important as the outcome itself, right? We value the personal investment of everyone, we involve everyone in every process, that it's not about speed and expedience, but rather slower is sometimes better, because we're not just shifting policy, but we're shifting culture, right? When we breed a culture of equity and justice and happiness, compassion, that trickles into our students. Does that make sense? Yeah. Other ways of kind of creating this community is like doing a pluses and deltas. Anybody heard of pluses and deltas? Yeah. So this is a really basic format of, naming if we do a debrief on a leadership retreat or this conference or how equity programs are going. We name all the things that are going well. We are strength-based in our approach, but we are also proactive about naming what are ways to grow. So naming not just like, having like gripes about the food at a conference or, like we're not doing enough, right? We're not getting enough numbers for our programs. But rather, what are things that we're going to shift to be proactive? And so framing it in such a way where we're going to grow this way, not we're just going to be cynical and negative. Does that make sense? Right? But it's important to stay on the pluses and finish that first, because by just the nature of who we are, we tend to want to like name all the critiques, right? But it's important for us to know our strengths so we can build on top of that. Does that make sense? Right? Having surveys and forums, this is all a practitioner of what it is to research, engage in qualitative and quantitative, feedback. We need to be research-oriented in our practice too. Doing facilitation in a way where everyone has a voice and not just the chair, right? Doing check-ins and check-outs, doing shout-outs. And I think when you're doing this level of feedback, right, may that be, what are ways we can make our equity programs better? Or how can we change the culture of the way we talk to each other and give feedback or do evaluations? That we have a track system and a methodology that explains, like, this is what we heard from you all as a staff, and this is the proactive steps that we're creating because of that data collection. Does that make sense? Right? So show methodology and show a proactive way you're taking steps to that methodology. Yeah? Okay? And for me, is stories. Like, we can't forget that we're whole beings as we come into this work, and so we have to cultivate ways to create stories. We tell stories because we need to express, that we need to educate, that we need to entertain. We heard from students because that's the reason why we're here. So why not cultivate that amongst our staff and validate the identities and the beings that the staff come into our space with, right? And so making space for socials and getting to know each other and being whole in our work and not just talking about, the next, report, right? So June Jordan has this incredible quote called, "To tell the truth is to become beautiful. To begin to love yourself, value yourself, and that's political in its most profound way." So continue to tell stories. Do open mics, do writing workshops, have icebreakers. So I know for me this is key as a poet, and I continue this work, and that's what I believe as an artist, but also as an advocate, as an educator. Is that it always comes back to the most human aspect of ourselves, which is stories. We connect, not because of our accolades and our titles, but rather that we all struggle. The idea that we all going through something connects us as humans. So cultivating space for that is necessary. So how will you help cultivate a healthy and critical culture among your peers on your campus? And so we won't have a lot of time. I'm gonna just wrap up with this last poem. It was and I'm happy to share this presentation too as my citations. But I'm just going to end with the person that I talked about. She's my favorite person in the whole wide world, my mother. She was the reason that I unfortunately had to transition from my job into being a rogue poet. But I wanted to because I needed to take care of my mom. She's undergoing stage 4 colon cancer, is going through chemotherapy. But she was the inspiration of this book, the inspiration of the work that I do today. Somehow she trusted me in not having a job and just talking to people. And for an immigrant Asian woman, that's a lot of trust. So it's been a complete honor. I would love to meet every single one of you at the end of this conference or sometime. Like I said, I have books and posters to sell, so I would love the opportunity to meet you all. So one more time, this is the last poem. We having a good time? Say word. Word. Good time, say what's up. What's up? You having a good time? Say hey. Hey. Yomotu Merukongo Namkan Jai to do Namkan. With the autumn wind, the mother lulls her child to sleep. In 5 minutes of the night, she stays awake all mo. Hi, ba, bon, num measures. Mo. While other mothers may greet their kids in loving Betty White voices, my mom, she only speaks to me in direct orders. Take out the trash, Fong, refill the rice. Now as a kid, there was things I didn't quite understand. For example, I didn't know why our garage was to be selected as an unofficial storage place for half of Sacramento's rice supply. There was no way I was gonna refill all that rice. When my mom heard that prices for rice were about to go up, I swear this Asian woman cleaned out every Asian supermarket like it was the end of the world. Take out the trash, Fong. Before I even opened the cabinet underneath the kitchen sink, I already had that disgusting fizz face and that potent smell of baby diapers and fish sauce. Hit me like a punch in the face. I reach out to grab the washing detergent bucket that we apparently call a trash can, tie up the Ranch 99 grocery bag, and take out of the dumpster out back. Mom, I swear I've seen these things about trash bags with straps and odor-blocking protection. I don't know why we haven't upgraded, but there's at least one thing I understand. Our nose warms to the smell of pho, bún thịt nướng, mì quán, mì ly, canh chua, bún bò Huế, hey, right? You see, our mothers don't love by their words, but by their actions. They don't give kind-hearted compliments, but direction and the food. Their food is a signature of their love because they don't hug and kiss the way other mothers do. Hi. Well, she doesn't cook, she sews. With steady weathered hands, she sews with sincerity and confidence. Every stitch landed in exactly the right place. Sometimes sister prom dresses don't fit in a big family budget, so she searches store rack samples and sews overnight, working her non-stop magic, humming the lullabies of olden time to the hum of the sewing machine. And she creates a masterpiece. She sews it together at the seam between generations, reconciling language barriers and cultural misunderstandings that can stretch so thin they eventually break. And when those breaks happen, they need repair. She redoes the stitching, making it stronger than ever before, ready to be stretched and challenged again. Bye. Now, do you all remember 90 family sitcoms? Yeah? Okay, so make some noise. Full House? Okay, Family Matters? Home Improvements? Fresh Prince of Bel-Air? Right. We grew up watching these in-between dinner family shows, so they gotta mean something, right? I deduce every 90 family sitcom plot into one holistic summary. 1, kids want to do something, parents won't let them. 2, they do it anyways. 3, everything that can go wrong goes wrong, parents catch them, they get angry, parents have an epiphany, go for a long talk, kids apologize, parents apologize. How's beef with you, son? Thanks, mom. Hugs, kisses, and the credits start rolling. Yeah, this doesn't look like Vietnamese mothers, though. Vietnamese mothers' love doesn't always look pretty with skittle rainbows. It's not child-parent talks with loving background music or Disney Channel smiles or corny lines of life philosophy. You see, our parents practice what you call assertive guidance, but in America, they apparently call it child abuse. But you know, mothers use tools of love, right? With all authority, like the fly swatter, you know what I'm saying? The feather duster, the broomsticks without the actual broom part, and the slippers, you know, the chocolates, because they got a backup just in case, right? In our mother's eyes is proper parenting. Their acts of love may be misinterpreted as like statements of violence. For example, "Thou said I'm a jut," directly translated means "I will kick you until you die." But you know, in mother's love language, what that really means is, "Son, I will use all my strength to teach you," right? "My say, big time down, boy, you got to know the back of my hand." "Son, you will understand the soft, tenderly caress of a motherly touch," right? "Oh my God, I've never met a child like you." "Oh my God, never had a child as special as you." These words leave scars on traumatizing reflexes, a nervous-stricken muscle. To never some of what Mama says. The pain that she inflicts on us is nothing to the pain that she feels every single day. Fong, the faded photographs of a family, posed in front of a camera on a stand of seafood tone and worn racks, reminder of a life before communist warfare in the South. Escapes on motorboats, a reeking of gasoline, pirates stealing the last of a food, drink, and sisters, moving from refugee camp to unknown terrain, having to start life all over again, working 6 days a week, 15 hours a day, every month of the year, hard arthritis heads, parts carcinogen poison paint for fingernail glimmer, and they really ask why. Vietnamese American women are 5 times more likely to have cervical cancer than white women. It reminds us that we will never suffer the way she did. None. She no longer lulls us to sleep, tucking us in and kissing us goodnight, but she is always there. Not just with the autumn wind, but when the confronting tornado, earthquakes, landslides through measures, days, months, and years, she is drought. The sacrifices our mothers make for us to never thirst. Waves crashing down on us like fly swatters and stir-fried chopsticks. Streams connecting and nurturing our lives one generation at a time. Rain, abundant like the food you bring to our tables every single day. There's no way for us to repay her for what she's done for us. But through the words of this poem, we love her. We honor her. Thank you, Mom. Come on, man.